Have you heard that there's a witch's hex circle here in the Northern Irish countryside? Well, if not, that's probably because in spite of what one local influencer is trying to tell people, there isn't. Hi, I'm Robert J. E. Simpson, and while I wouldn't normally do a video like this, there's nothing that gets my goat faster than somebody who is simply making stuff up for the views. Now, I've no doubt that if I'm someone who pops up in your FYP, that you'll have come across a recent video about one of my absolute favourite places on the island, Ballynoe Stone Circle in County Down. And in it, the particular influencer who made the video in question claims that people are calling it a witch's hex circle. But the thing is, nobody has ever called it that. That's a nonsensical term that's been made up for a generation of people who watch too much Hocus Pocus, The Craft, and Buffy reruns. A quick Google of the term brings up a handful of results with it, all of them pointing back to videos pointed by the same influencer. Actually, it's the same video across multiple platforms. Nobody else has ever used that phrase. It is never referred to this site at any point before. Ballynoe has no historical connections to witches, and much of what you see today that could be associated with the modern idea of Wicca, itself an invention of the 1950s, including the offerings to the fairies and the modern Cluny tree, are very recent additions and simply weren't there 20 or 30 years ago whenever I was making my first visits to the site. A hex is a curse or a malevolent spell, and that to me sits at odds with this sort of positive Wiccan spin of things like these offerings. So why the heck would anybody start suggesting that Ballynoe was a witch's hex circle? What grates me even more is that this influencer hasn't done so much as a cursory reading of the Wikipedia page, never mind actually doing a few minutes of basic online research, claiming that the true purpose of this monument is still a mystery, and that they think it's a graveyard, and that there isn't very much information about it. None of that is true. Sure, we don't know what the actual religious practices of the people that built it were, but we can make guesses based on what we know about other religions, the archaeological record, and to an extent the writing of early historians like Tacitus, who tended to paint the people of these islands in a rather unflattering light anyway. And we can make deductions about their purpose. This is an era of prehistory, so before stuff gets written down, so we are dependent on physical remains and much earlier written histories. I actually posted my own short video about Ballynoe a few months ago, and there's enough information within it, if people are interested, to suggest possible directions for people to research, if you want. Now, what is true is that we don't entirely understand the phases of development or why the site is constructed in the way it is. But there has been archaeological excavations, geophysical surveys, and more. The government's own website contains over 170 pages of excavation reports, which are there to be viewed by anyone. There's coverage in numerous books, things like this, Audrey Burrell's The Stone Circles, journal articles. There are people like myself who have been photographing and drawing and taking inspiration from this site for decades. We know for a fact that there were several people buried at the site within cairns, a known and well-studied form of inhumation. So we know it's a burial site. If you want to call it a graveyard, sure, it's a kind of graveyard. We also can and have observed astronomical alignments of the stones, which would suggest something about the importance of certain seasons and the stars to their faith. All of which I think is far more interesting and respectful than making up facts for views. Experts are fairly united in understanding Ballynoe as a site of burial and ritual. Now, I'm not gatekeeping here. I love it when people discover unusual and interesting places. That's the whole shtick of my channel. I love it when they ask questions, when they speculate, when they enthuse. I can remember sitting in at my archaeological tutorials when I was at university and having those same very questions and being out on field trips chatting with professors and my colleagues asking about these sorts of things. But that's no excuse for someone who is posturing as a guide to all things in Northern Ireland, then not doing so much as reading the information boards that are on site and blatantly making up the mythology just so more people click on their videos. That's destructive. And look, I'm under no delusions. They won't care what I or anybody else says if it's corrective or critical. But part of what I've been trying to do on my own feeds here is to examine local myths and to look into the origins and coverage of them. This is one that I sincerely hope doesn't get repeated by folk who simply ape popular videos without any scrutiny. Ballynoe, I'll say it again, has never, ever been known as a witch's hex circle. That is meaningless. Do let me know, however, if you think this sort of fact-checking is something that's worth doing. And I should say, as always, I'm Robert J. Simpson. Don't forget to like, follow, and share for more weird and wonderful places, local histories, and myth busting.